Welcome back to IDFC First Bank Presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 12. You're watching our special weekend edition, SuperAchievers Making New India, powered by VoiceFord. In this segment, we'll be featuring a company called Alt. We'll be exploring the evolving landscape of alternative investments in India and how Alt is using technology to democratize access to this asset class. Pooja Jain brings you this conversation with Kunal Moktan, co-founder Alt.
In today's dynamic investment landscape, alternative investments have gained prominence for offering portfolio diversification beyond traditional stocks and bonds. With exposure to sectors like real estate, private equity, venture capital, and hedge funds, alternative investments present a compelling opportunity for investors seeking higher returns and access to exclusive asset classes for portfolio diversification. At the forefront of this shift is Alt, the holding company behind Property Share. With a mission to democratize alternative investments, Alt is helping everyday investors access institutional-grade opportunities at significantly lower minimums. To understand how Alt is redefining access and innovation in the alternative investment space, we spoke to Kunal Moktan, co-founder of Alt.
Kunal, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you for having me.
And for sake of some context setting and for the benefit of our viewers, walk us through your professional journey to date at Property Share and what ultimately led you to establish Alt, which to my understanding is a platform for alternative investments. What was the market gap, perhaps, that you were looking to bridge at the time?
I started Property Share with my co-founder, Hashim, in 2015. I started my career in 2007 at Blackstone, the private equity fund, or rather the largest alternative investment fund manager today. When we started in Blackstone, it was a $200 billion AUM alternative investment manager. Today, it's almost 1.1 trillion. But we were setting up Blackstone's Asia office back in 2007. Blackstone didn't have Asia presence back at that time in real estate. And three of us rather at the time, started investing out of a global Blackstone fund into emerging market commercial office real estate, mostly in India.
I see.
So I was there for about 8 years, invested close to $1 billion, and we ended up becoming the largest office landlords in the country. So invested with the Embassy Group in Bangalore, the Panchsheel Group in Pune, with Salar Purias in Hyderabad, and so on and so forth. 2015 or 2014, I left Blackstone because I felt like there was a big market gap to allow individual investors to get access to this product. And that's how Hashim and I came together. We were batchmates at IIM Ahmedabad. We started this platform called Property Share to offer the largest alternate within the alternative space, which was real estate, to normal individual investors at a much lower investment threshold, which at that time was 25 lakhs. But when we started Property Share, we didn't start with the vision of doing only real estate. We started with the vision of doing all alternative assets at the time. But because real estate is the largest and we had done a lot of real estate before that, we said, okay, let's start with real estate and then we can expand to other alternates going forward. So we did that for almost 10 years now. It's been fairly successful. We manage almost $200 to $250 million of investor capital. And now we've launched a new platform called Alt, which gives investors access to a wider range of alternative products.
Well, sir, I've got a follow-up question for you there. So when you say alternative products or the alternates asset class, in layman language, what does that broadly constitute?
So alternates basically means any asset class which is not your traditional asset class. So a traditional asset class would be, let's say, a fixed deposit, a government security, a bond, or an equity instrument like a stock, which everybody knows and has been investing for decades. An alternative asset is something that's an alternate to these traditional forms of investment. They are slightly esoteric in nature sometimes, and therefore people are a bit more sort of weary of getting into this asset class, but they have given very good returns over the last 20, 30 years. And that's why someone like Blackstone has grown its AUM, almost quadrupled its AUM to $1 trillion, because there's been a lot of allocation from smart capital, which is the pension funds and endowments, etc., to alternates. Could be a hedge fund, it could be a private equity fund, a real estate fund, a commercial real estate, commodities, currencies. any of these cryptocurrencies today are sort of quite gaining popularity. So anything outside of the traditional sources of capital investment.
Well, you've hinted a bit at why alternative asset classes belong in one's portfolio, but what type of investor is best suited to capitalize on these opportunities? What is their risk profile? Broadly speaking, what are their investment goals? Who is this asset class for?
For the longest time, alternative assets were reserved for slightly sophisticated investors because, like I said, they were illiquid in nature. It required some level of understanding of the underlying capital structures, and therefore, it was reserved for pension funds, etc., etc. But over the last decade, couple of decades, it has become more and more accessible to an individual investor. And now that we know what alternates are and how well they've done, they are now available to a wider group of individual investors. So I would say, of course, if you're a beginner, you're just investing, start with traditional forms of investment. Start with a government bond or an equity instrument or a mutual fund, index fund, etc. But if you are slightly more sophisticated, if you've maybe studied finance, you've been investing for a while, you'd like to diversify your portfolio,
right,
then I think even someone with a few years of experience can look at alternates as an investment strategy in their portfolio.
And it seems to me that that is exactly the sweet spot that alt is trying to fill, providing access to the alternates asset class to individual investors, correct?
Absolutely.
How does one do so? How does one take that first step? Say they arrive at the alt platform. What happens next?
So before I get to the process, alternates have become such a large allocation for these investors today. We feel like it's something that one should look to have in their portfolio because it gives superior returns, slightly riskier, but not as risky as one would assume. And therefore, we do encourage that investors have some sort of allocation to alternates in their portfolio. Now, our own platform, which we started with the goal of providing this access to a normal individual investor, because it can all sound very, like I said, complicated and frightening when you hear it first.
It's daunting.
But it isn't, and we feel like it's something that, if it's explained properly, can be very helpful to an investor's portfolio. That's how we started Alt, and the process is very simple. We have a platform called altinvest.ai. You come to the platform. There are various alternates available for you to invest. You could invest in, let's say, rent-yielding commercial real estate, a high-yield product, which is listed today as an SM REIT. You could invest in a UK warehouse directly. You could invest in a public market product, which invests in, let's say, sort of instruments backed by the commercial real estate or residential real estate. You could invest in private credit, which has now become very, very popular, which is on the debt side of the business. And there are returns that range from 8-9% to 20-25%.
Over what time horizon?
Over 3 to 4 years. I mean, every year, right? So that's the kind of IRRs we are talking about. So you can just come to the website, look at one of these opportunities, go through them, speak to someone from our team who will explain it to you, and then just go ahead with a few clicks of the button. You could end up investing in it.
And so what's the next strategic frontier for Alt as a brand? What's the short-term and perhaps the long-term vision that you've inculcated and are looking to fulfill?
I mean, if we look at all the large global investment managers in the alternate space, they've all expanded their product offerings over time as more products have evolved. And there has been some amount of push from the investor community saying, look, this sounds really interesting. I'd like you to allocate my capital to this asset class. For example, cryptocurrencies, which were not there 5-10 years ago, but suddenly sort of, everybody was talking about it. And private credit, for example, is similar. Venture capital investing is very similar. So we would like to do something very similar in Alt. We've started with something we know a lot about, which is real estate. So a lot of our initial alternative universe that is available to the investor is real estate based, whether it's private credit, whether it's publicly listed real estate or private real estate. Sure. But over time, we will offer products like venture investing, which is slightly more riskier but higher return. Right. We will offer infrastructure funds. We will offer tactical opportunity funds. So anything that is opportunistic, which we feel like is something that will give risk-adjusted high returns for investors. So broaden the product offering on the platform as much as possible. It's a global platform. Anybody can invest in anywhere. The greatness of the platform is that you could be an American wanting to invest in commercial real estate in India, or an Indian looking to invest in residential real estate in Japan, or private credit in Europe. Right. You can do all of that on the platform going forward. So the vision is obviously to grow the AUM and the products geographically as well as asset class-wise for all the investors on the platform.
And Kunal, by way of closing comments for other entrepreneurs who may be watching, who may be tuning into this episode, right? What words of advice might you have if they were perhaps struggling to find their footing in this space?
I'm not sure I'm the right person to give that sort of advice, but I guess having been on this journey for about 10 odd years, I always tell people that you should first like what you're doing. You should not get into it just for the sake of there being a gap in the industry. You want to do something or copying someone else that has done something like this in the West, which happened a lot. Yes, some of them have been popular, but unless you really like what you're doing, I feel like you'll not be motivated to do this over a long period of time. And the second thing I always tell them is, you always take your successes and failures very lightly.
Sure.
You don't get very high when you get success, and you don't get very low when you get failures, because that happens a lot in this business. You get a lot of failures if you sort of get bogged down by it, and then fail to see the sort of silver lining in the cloud. Then it can be difficult. And at the same time, the successes can be really, really good, and you feel like, yes, you've conquered everything, you've done a great thing. And if you let that get to your head, then it becomes quite difficult.
So get over the high, get over the low.
Absolutely, balance them.
Well, Kunal, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, and we wish you and the larger Alt team all the continued success.
Thank you very much. Lovely speaking to you.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of IDFC First Bank Presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 12. We hope you enjoyed the conversations. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.